All right. Are we recording? We are.
Oh, good.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Symbiota Support Group, June 2024. We just have a couple of announcements to start off. Lindsay, do you want to cover those?
Sure, I can do that. So we just wanted to make some announcements about where you can find us this summer because the Support Hub will be at a few conferences. And so the first one, next slide, please, will be in just a few weeks. Katie, I believe you'll be at this one. Will anyone else from the team be at Botany?
I don't think so. I think I'm the only one going to that one.
Okay, I figured there might be a few people in the audience who will be at Botany. So if you're wanting to chat with anyone from our team, Katie will be there, and that's June 15th to 19th in Grand Rapids. Next
And
slide.
I'll be at the iDig Bio booth, so it'll be easy to find me at all times.
Good point. Will there be a booth at this one? So Katie will also be in Madrid for IBC in July.
Yes, and I'll also be an iDig Bio booth, so you can find me as well as many fantastic iDig Bio folks there too.
And then, so we've got June and July covered. And then in August, Katie and I will be at the Ecological Society of America meeting, or ESA, at the beginning of August in Long Beach. And again, we'll be at the booth there too. So for all three conferences, if you can't find us in the mix, the people in the crowds are giving presentations, go to the booth and you will likely find us there at some point. So 3 conferences coming up, and there will be Support Hub representation at each one. So check that out if you happen to be at any of these meetings this summer.
Bring all your crazy data problems and all those things.
Definitely. And then I just want to make a last announcement. Next month, there won't be a Symbiota support group meeting for July. We often take a recess at the beginning of July because most people are like on vacation and not around anyway. So no need to tune in, and enjoy your break in July and your summer. I think that's it for announcements.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lindsay. So today we are going to talk about data cleaning and data quality. So the impetus to this was actually at the Digital Data Conference last week. If some of you guys tuned in, we put a workshop together on data quality and how data quality can be improved at the data provider level, which is most of y'all. And we've talked about data cleaning before, and as you might recall, we have some excellent data cleaning tools, including the geography cleaning tool, the taxonomy cleaning tool, and then the batch editing tool. And I believe all 3 of those were demoed in our previous data cleaning webinar, probably a year and a half ago. So you can go and watch that. The tools are pretty much the same these days. And then we're just kind of going to go into more depth today about very particular things that you can fix in your data that might not be easily discoverable from your taxonomic cleaning tool. This workshop was last Friday. I think maybe a person or two were there in person. I think Chilla's here, so Chilla was there in person. So it might be a little bit of a repeat, but we are mostly here to talk about steps that you can take to improve the quality of your data. So we're going to talk about what is data quality very briefly, and then go through this resource that we developed with a bunch of collaborators called the Data Quality Toolkit. Okay, so data quality has been discussed in numerous venues, particularly recently, and you might try to define it in multiple ways. There's been a lot of discussion about, is it just fitness for use? Well, who's used? Is it fidelity to the original? So it's exactly what was on the label, or is it the slightly altered version of what was on the label? Is it just consistent across all of your data sets or all of your records? This is a definition from IBM. How well a data set meets criteria for accurately, completeness, validity, consistency, uniqueness, timeliness, and fitness for purpose. So that's kind of a high bar. That's like everything about it is great. And so you might think about your data quality on multiple of these kind of spectra. So completeness is a good spectrum to think about in one way. Validity, consistency is another axis, actually, you might think about your data in. Uniqueness, I'm not really sure what they mean by uniqueness. I guess that means when something is supposed to be unique, it is unique. Timeliness, well, there's only so many hours in the day, so you guys are all working very hard on that, I know. And then fitness for purpose. And that's kind of what I want to focus on as kind of fitness for purpose in our discussion here today. I consider data, high quality data, to be that which is easy to use in terms of primary data types such as date, location, and taxonomy, and is in a format that is accessible by common data handling programs. So when we're doing data cleaning, that's generally what we're trying to do, is make sure that it's all easily accessible, easily formatted. Of course, we want it to be as close to the original as possible, in so much as it can still be accessed by computerized means. So a short version is you could load it into R and run statistics on it. You don't have to reformat a bunch of dates and change a bunch of, fix a bunch of typos and such. So just be thinking about like what your criteria are for data quality. That's just kind of deserves a future think. Okay, so what I want to show you guys today is our data quality toolkit, and I'll walk through a couple of the instructions just so you get a handle of how to use this data quality toolkit for your own uses. So Lindsay will put the link in the chat, but the data quality toolkit is a page in the Symbiota docs in the editor guide. So if you go to Symbiota docs and you click on editor guide, then you'll be able to find it. I think it's under data cleaning. Yeah, it's just right here, data quality toolkit. So that's where you can find it, or just go to the link that was just in the chat. And this was inspired by a number of other resources. For one, there's Bob Mesabov's Data Cleaners Cookbook. And this is a walkthrough in a very similar format to our data quality toolkit, but it walks you through it in the bash shell, which is kind of more like a terminal command line tool, which is great if you can do that and are comfortable with it. But, you know, many of us don't have the time to learn yet another thing to fix our data. And there are ways that we can fix a lot of these things directly using Symbiota. So that's what we focused on here. And then it's also worth a look to learn more about GBIF and IDIG-BIO's data quality flags. And if you have participated in a portal campaign, we've talked about data quality flags before. They basically are finding some of the issues in your data, and you can use those GBIF and IDIG-BIO kind of locations to link back to your record and fix those issues as they come up. Okay, so in our data quality toolkit, we have a number of categories of types of data quality issues that we see. And these are kind of the leftmost dots. So there's one with regard to catalog numbers, several with regard to dates, many with regard to geography, and a couple of taxonomy and other issues. So how you can use this data quality toolkit is you could just walk through the whole thing with your data set and try to fix all of the things you see here. Or another possible use is that if you have students or postdocs or folks who could work on just a small, easily digestible chunk of this data cleaning at a time, that could be a really easy way of doing some cleanup in kind of a modular fashion. So you can see each type of data quality issue has its own little section here, and the problem is defined. And then we give you a solution. And if there are multiple methods, we give you a couple of different ways to fix that. And so you could just say, all right, here's a link. Please fix all of the problems with our dates, at least according to the issues that are in the data quality toolkit. So what do those look like? For example, we have dates. Date hasn't happened yet. So the problem would be that the date the specimen was collected, which is often designated using the event date field, is in the future. And so there are a couple of ways that you could find that find those problems and fix those problems. So I'm gonna pop into, let's just go into the Lichen portal. I hope Frank doesn't get mad at me for finding his issues. Maybe it's gonna be perfectly clean, I don't know. So we could go into the record search forum, and this is nicely linked to the instructions about how to get to the record search forum so that you don't have to figure out each step independently. So I go to my record search forum, and then in the sort by field, select date, then select descending from the second drop-down list. So I'm going to go in the sort, date, and I'm going to say descending, list my table, and then it's going to show me all the specimen records descending in date. Luckily, all of these dates have happened, so it looks like none of those are problematic. But if you did have an event date problem here, then you could just open up that record. You might be able to compare the date to what's listed in the verbatim date. Maybe that's where the issue came, is that they just didn't enter it in event date correctly. But some other issues may not be as easy to fix, because if I have no image, I don't really know what the correct value is supposed to be if this says something weird. Sometimes you can infer, like if it says 9150, it probably was trying to say 1950, but you're not 100% sure until you go back and look at your specimen record. So again, this is a nice thing to pass off to students, or to just, dedicate 1 hour to, because you might have to actually go in and look for specimens, look at the labels, and fix that data directly in the occurrence editor. There are a couple of things in this list that are both easy to find and easy to fix, but many of these things are easy to find but require kind of a one-by-one process to go fix them. And I'm sure y'all are very familiar with that problem. It's just we don't have high fidelity of the data source to the data in the database at all times because of typos and human error. And then there's another way you can learn about that. When the date is suspiciously old, you could basically do the same thing. You go back into your search forum. Hold on, I gotta move my Zoom controls. Note that if you do date ascending, it's going to list blank dates at the very beginning. So if you have a lot that have no event date, yeah, in this case, there's no event date, so there's not even a field for event date in my table. And you might have to scroll through several pages of that. So I would recommend also saying date is not null. Then you're for sure seeing all of the actual values of event date in ascending order. So it's going to do that real quick, or perhaps not super quick because this is a relatively large collection. And there we go, like 1820, that's feasible. But if it said like 820, I would be suspicious. Another way you could do this, and you were probably saying, Katie, why don't you just do it this way? Is you could say date. I believe you can do this. Greater than 2024. Yeah, so that's any date that's larger than 2024-0101, or I could say 603. There is nothing that is suspiciously in the future. And then you could also do a less than with some smaller number that you think might be the limit for your collection dates. Allison asks, we are filling out data in small collections which have skeletal records, ending up with plenty which are not matched up. What is the best way to match these up, evaluate, and delete them? I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you saying that you are importing the data as images and then you're not able to connect them to their records, or what is not being matched up?
I'll just say there's existing skeletal data, and then we're entering things, and people are supposed to be matching records to existing skeletal, but they're not finding them, or the skeletal was misentered and it doesn't quite match.
Oh, right.
So
Mhm.
then we end up with all these semi-blank records, and I could just go in and delete them all, but is there a smart way to do this? It takes one by one, like admin delete. That's
Mhm.
that's takes a while.
I mean, if you have a bunch and you know what their Symbiota ID numbers are, or their catalog numbers, or something that's unique about them, you could just send those to us as a spreadsheet and we could batch delete them for you.
That's nice. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions about what we've walked through so far or other data quality issues? I'll just walk through one or two more. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but then we can open it up to if other people have input or ideas or things that they do that we don't have in this list. Okay, so another thing, let's go down into some of the geography. A lot of our problems can be fixed, use the geographic cleaning tool. But some things that you might think about are, let's see, like invalid coordinates. That's a pretty easy search to do. You'll notice that when you are doing, when you're editing a record and you put in the latitude and longitude, it will give you an error if you try to enter anything smaller than -90 or bigger than 90 in latitude. But those validations don't occur when you're importing the data as a spreadsheet. So if you've ever tried to upload a spreadsheet into something that does a million validations as you're putting it in, you just remember like having to go back and change your data set and then put it in, and then it gives you an error again. So you take the data set and you change it again and you put it back in and it gives you another error, but it's a different one. We're trying to avoid that system and that round and round, and then we finally get the data in after a few hours by not necessarily running all those validations while you're doing the data import. And what that can lead to is some messy data, because then you have some values smaller than -90 or greater than 90. But then you can go in and find those data pretty easily just by doing a search. So you could just go into decimal latitude and you could say is greater than 90. And look, Frank's data is very clean, so we're not finding any issues. But if there were some issues, we would be able to find them. And then most taxonomy things can be fixed using the taxonomic cleaning tool. If you've ever had a problem where your special characters like an enye or anything with an accent isn't showing up right, that's a character encoding problem. And character encoding, at least the way that I understand it, is kind of the language that your computer uses to speak to another computer, saying like, this is an A, this is an A, and your computer may not be providing the information in the way that the target computer is expecting to receive it. And so then you get kind of these weird like @ symbols and A's with squiggles on top of them instead of the ones that you're supposed to be looking at. So if you ever see those issues in your data, probably if your data set is already in the Symbiota portal, then if it's like in one particular field, you can do a find and replace using the batch cleaning tool. But if it's like in a bunch of different fields, then you might just want to contact us so that we can do kind of more of a batch find and replace across multiple different fields. So if you see that, that's a good reason to check your table of data before you click that final like import my data into the database button, because you'll see all those character encoding issues pretty quickly. And then you can go back to your file and save it as a UTF-8 CSV. And then hopefully that's going to load everything in with the correct encoding. All right. Are there any questions about the data quality toolkit? I know probably a lot of you are scrolling through it and seeing whether you have done those or you might find issues with those. But we're really interested to hear what other data quality issues or hacks you guys have, and what you might recommend to any of your colleagues here or to us.
I'll add something. So when Katie was putting some of this together, she also made sort of an equivalent version in Excel. So you can also, you could download a copy of your database, which probably is a really good idea to do that before you start making any sweeping changes on your data set. And I can put a link in the chat on how to do that. So especially if you're going to make batch changes, download a copy of your data just in case something goes awry, if you're like finding and replacing and accidentally replace the wrong thing. But you could also download a copy of your data and then you can work with it in Excel just to like check off things as you're going. I find that kind of handy to have that like on the side sometimes. Instead of just doing it all in the portal, you could have your spreadsheet on like another monitor and go through it and find the problems, but then actually fix it in the portal. Sometimes I find that to be a helpful way to do things. And I'll just go find the how to download a copy of your database right now and stick it in the chat for anybody who wants to reference it.
I just posted that in there, but if you could find the link to the Excel data quality toolkit, that would be awesome.
I will do that right now.
Cass says, one thing I do with spreadsheet data before I upload is copy my dates, coordinates, and elevations into an alternate page and sort them and look for outliers. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, like before you even have the data in there, make sure that it matches your expectations. One thing that I also do sometimes is if you have any dates, we all know that Excel does funky things with dates. What you might try doing is opening your file in Notepad++ or some other non-Excel CSV opening software and see whether the dates have been changed into some weird format. Because it's going to render exactly what the Symbiota portal is going to render too. And so you just want to like do a little double check that, okay, these make sense. Mark says, if your data is shared with GBIF, you can utilize their issues and flags tool, including an API, which will identify more complex error types, such as coordinates not matching a country, etc. If your data is not on GBIF, you can still use the tool through the GBIF validator. Yeah, excellent points, Mark. So there is, if your data is published to GBIF, you can go, and I'll just go ahead and show this, since we do this all the time. So ASU's data is in GBIF, so I'm going to go to that data set page. And make sure you're looking at the data set page. Whoops. And you'll be able to see that by it saying occurrence data set. Otherwise, you also have a publisher page. It says publisher at the top. But if you click on your specific data set and you go over to metrics and you scroll down to the left side, there is this wonderful table of occurrences per issues and flags. Some of these you can pretty much ignore, like don't worry too much about collection match and institution match fuzzy. You don't need to worry about taxon match, taxon ID ignored. You don't really have to worry about continent derived from coordinates. That just means that they auto-provided a continent. But you do probably need to start thinking about, for example, recorded date invalid or country coordinate mismatch. Country derived from coordinates. That means that you probably have you have coordinates but no country values in your country fields. Presumed swapped coordinate, things like that. And what's nice is if you click on one of these, it'll give you a list of those 98 records. You could download them, or you could just look at them right here. And luckily there's a link directly to your Symbiota page, and you could reevaluate that specimen and make any edits that you need to do. And then Mark also talks about the GBIF validator tool, which is a tool that you can use to stick a Darwin Core archive into the data validator, and it'll say, hey, here are the issues that you have with your data already. Chilla, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I'm sorry. This has been bothering me for a long time, and now I'm and just looking at the flags where it said, assume geodatum WIGS 84. When you have that datum in the field, does that refer to the datum of the decimal lat and long, or the datum of the verbatim coordinates? And the reason why I asked that is because I've run into that issue before where, and to be honest, I need to double check myself on this. I don't know if the collector was confused, but they were trying to say that the UTM coordinates were referencing when they were converted to UTM, they came from an NAD 27 system. So then I used that and I worked backwards to convert it to lat and long in WIGS 84. So then that geodatic datum, that's supposed to go with the decimal lat and long, but not the verbatim coordinate. Because I see a lot of people convert it and then put NAD 27 in the geodatic datum for his records.
That's a good point, and I honestly haven't thought about that before. Like if the datum is there, I will just put it into the datum field. But if the collector has not provided it in decimal latitude format, then I think we are reprojecting it into WGS 84. So yeah, you're right. We probably have a lot of errors in that then.
Okay, well, I mean, I was just double checking because I was like, wait a second. Because I see that a lot, because yeah, we'll go through the trouble of converting the UTM, but then it still says NAD 27 just because the students processing the data see NAD 27 on the label. But it's been reprojected. Although I see that Mark does say it looks like the standard is for decimal latitude and decimal longitude. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for checking that, Mark. I was just about to do that.
Okay, well, that's perfect. Yeah, and then for the verbatim coordinates, because sorry, that just brings up another issue that I've seen is the question is, it's a calculator, right? So then at first I was trying to teach all the students and the volunteers to put it in following the calculator, the format that the calculator would recognize. But then somebody else brought up that at two other institutions that they had worked at, they were using that field just as verbatim. So they were ignoring the fact that it worked as a calculator and they just put it in exactly as it appeared. So I was curious, is that okay? Is that you guys' intention? Which way should that go? If you guys have any thoughts, since it is a calculator, I don't know if it's affecting anything.
I would personally put it in verbatim as what's on the label.
Okay.
And if one thing you could do is have them put it in formatted in a way that the calculator will read, convert it, then remove it, or just change the things that make it more verbatim. Like say that they typed DEG. Actually, that might work in the calculator, I'm not sure. But if it said something weird, like it was all slung together in one string and that wouldn't trigger the calculator, then you can kind of separate it until the calculator works and then fix it back to when it makes it actually verbatim.
Okay. No, that's what
But-
I figured, because I like to preserve the verbatim coordinates.
Yeah,
and I think-
verbatim should be verbatim. I think that's
Yeah.
the intention.
Okay, and then yeah, you put the verbatim datum and the verbatim coordinates. I think I like that. Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Alan Peterson says, when evaluating dates, it often helps to restrict dates to a particular collector. This often shows up century errors where, for example, a Cummings record may be recorded as 1982, which is, of course, as long after she died. Yeah, good point, Alan. It really helps to know your collectors a little bit. Anna Fowler says, you can turn off almost all the autocorrect features that Excel uses in settings, which can help with the funky dates. But yes, if you have dates before January 1st, 1900, you have to hand type and format as text. Yeah. Any other tips, tricks, questions? PJ has one. Once he finds the unmute.
There
Got
we
it.
go. As you know, I've been cleaning up a mess up in the data for a couple of years, and we about got it clean. One of the things that I've been doing yesterday and today was just checking myself, just to inform everybody else. If you don't already know, don't ever sort data in Excel if rows are hidden. You will scramble your data. So I have been correcting that mistake for the last couple of years on behalf of the Donna at WBA. And we about got it done. But one of the things that I've been checking on the last couple of days is I'm projecting, actually plotting coordinates that are in the clean data in GIS to make sure that they're reasonable, just to check myself.
Mhm.
And when I started doing that, I had to consult a friend of mine who was an GIS analyst and botanist, and she pointed out to me that if you don't bring that into ArcMap the correct way, it will project. It may assume that it's WGS 84, but it may not. It may think it's NAT 83. So you could get fooled. And so I've been cleaning and messing with that. One of the things that we discussed is I had the impression that datum was just needed with UTM data, but she's saying no. Lat long data needs datum as well. And much of the data that we're looking at, I was looking at like 12,000 records by one collector, and about 4,600 of them have coordinate data, no datum on the label. So I just wrote to him saying, can you tell me, is it safe for me to assume, since all your labels have degree decimal minute is the format, can I assume that all of those are WGS 84? And I'm still waiting to hear back from him. Does that not need to be added into the datum field?
It depends on your definition of need. So is it required by the database? No. It's just going to assume WGS 84 because that's what most mapping platforms use right now.
Mhm.
Would a complete georeference have the datum? Absolutely. Because the datum is the explanation of how our round world was projected onto a flat surface, basically. And that can differ, especially at certain latitudes and longitudes. It can differ pretty widely in the difference between projections. I don't know how big that variance is. And again, it differs depending on where you are. So to be the most accurate, you would need a datum. But for the most part, you can get within the range of error if you're in one of these projections. But I kind of said something like that in our data quality workshop, and Chandra Earle, who's done a lot of this work, especially in Pacific Islands, found that differences between projections actually made some pretty big errors in when she was trying to locate stuff. So it can be a big issue depending on where you are, but in a lot of cases, we just don't have data about projections because like before learning to georeference, like I didn't know what a projection was, nor did I think there was a difference between projections. And often people don't record that information on their label unless they're doing some very specific projection.
It seems one other related comment to that is that we have more than one source of coordinates for some of these. There was a student that took data from Cernic and did some work with it. When he was done, he had coordinates. The coordinates sometimes use the exact coordinates. Sometimes they use an app called geolocate. When you plot those, sometimes they are significantly different from what the original coordinates are. And it seems to me that we want to keep those original coordinates. If that data was taken with a GPS unit, even if it's a Garmin, it's more accurate than a geolocate. Would you agree?
There are errors often when people are when they're typing stuff onto labels, but for the most part, I think most people do keep the original coordinates rather than re-georeferencing specimens. Unless they just say like degrees minutes, in which case you're like, well, we could probably get better than degrees minutes because that's a pretty big error if you just do minutes and no seconds. Chilla, do you have a comment on this discussion or a different question? Because I'm going to go to the chat if it's.
Oh, it's on this. I was gonna
Okay,
say,
great.
to be fair, I also deal with rare species data, but typically speaking, especially if we pick students who are interested in GIS, I have them double check the coordinates because some of our collectors truly just misread or not. I mean, I don't know what's going on. They're in the field, they're collecting a lot of data. So I personally have the students just literally go and double check every single coordinate and make sure it makes sense. And they have found, unfortunately, some inconsistencies. And then that's how we store the verbatim coordinates as they put it into the verbatim coordinates. And then they put the correct coordinates in decimal Latin long with the WIGS 84, because that's what they're working with, the projection. And then they put notes in georeference remarks like, I checked this is what was wrong.
Mhm.
And I think that works really well. But also you can do a basic intersect, which is where I think someone mentioned it in the comments too, where you can just to double check that, okay, if the label says, 40-acre heritage preserve, does it actually fall within the boundaries in the shapefile? And then it can really quickly show you that something is wonky.
Definitely. Yeah, if you've ever, if you're on iNaturalist and you have your location to be like the metadata from your image and you're like taking your pictures and you're uploading them to iNaturalist, sometimes it'll be like you were in the nearest town, like the middle of the nearest town. All that to say, like phone GPSs, the GPSs that people are often using these days, actually give you really wonky coordinates sometimes. So probably GPS units are doing that a little bit less often, but I'm sure it happens as well. But then also they can transcribe things wrong. Like, collectors are just human too. So I definitely advocate for checking coordinates as you enter data. Okay, going into our questions and comments. Kirsten says, before I catalog and accession new specimens, I manually check to see if the specimen is a duplicate of the specimen already in our collection and whether or not the taxonomic names match IDIS. I do this manually by searching our collection by collector number and looking up taxonomic names that I'm not familiar with on IDIS. Are there any automated ways for me to do this? That is a good question. There are not automated ways of checking for duplicates on specimen data that has not already been imported into the database. What you could do is upload your data as with a certain processing status that isn't used elsewhere. And then you could run the duplicate linking tool, and then you could go into those records and see whether any of them found duplicates. But I don't know if that's going to be a much faster process than what you're already doing. And then for taxonomic names, you can probably use the taxonomic name resolution service. Taxonomic name resolution service, which I think IDIS is one of the things that you can search by, and I'm throwing that in the chat. But that's something that you can just copy your column of names and you can put them into taxonomic name resolution service, but I'm not sure if it will check like for the accepted name in IDIS. So I know it'll tell you whether it's a real name, but it will tell you, I don't know if it'll tell you whether it's like the accepted name. Allison asks, or does anyone else have a comment or a workflow that they do with regard to that? Kirsten says, if you have the full Microsoft suite, you can use Microsoft Access to run a find duplicates query against your existing collection data. Yeah, you could do that. Okay, Allison says, when entering TRS data, that's township range section data. It's very common in the United States, especially in older collections. What order format should we put in map, quad name, and meridian acronym? We've been putting map, quad name, and meridian acronym at the end of locality, but maybe it should be going into the verbatim coordinates field. Chilla says, we put TRS into the verbatim coordinates. I think that I would also recommend that that goes into the coordinates, the verbatim coordinates field. Does anyone else do anything different than that? I've seen it in both places, so, but it really does help you convert between one quote unquote coordinate system, township range section, into decimal lat long. Yes, Al, there is a township range section input box. So if you click that little F button, it opens it up and you can put township range section. And then there actually is a spot for, I'm in TNRS here. There is also a spot for the meridian and the, not the quad though. I don't think there's a spot for quad. So if I go into just a random record, and you click that little F button, that's where you can put township range section. Details is where I usually put like the quarter or the 16th. And then you can select the meridian here. So it looks like meridian is expected to go into verbatim coordinates. And I think quad would probably make sense to go in there too, because that does impact where your point is going to go. Let's see. Cass says, I dump all my coordinates into a Google Earth through a KLM builder to visualize all the dots in the map before I upload. Makes many errors very visible. Yeah, and that's a nice thing to do with your data regularly, is to look at them on a map and see whether any of them are in the ocean. Or if you're like in California, do any of them show up in China and you don't think you have very many Chinese specimens, or just look at the reciprocal of your location so that you can find out what lat longs have been swapped. But as Alan Peterson says, you can't always see whether the data are reasonable, because maybe you have a bunch of specimens in Kentucky, even though you're a Californian institution, because you legitimately have a bunch of specimens in Kentucky. Jim says the first 3,569 accession numbers need to have JBEC added in front of the number. Can I add these in one batch? You know, you cannot append, you can't batch append a string to an existing field. You can only do a find and replace in the batch update tool. So if you were replacing JEC with JBEC, you could do that batch, but you couldn't do that just from the batch update tool. But you can send us an email and we can do that on the back end. So if you still need that done, feel free.
Okay, thanks, Katie.
Yeah, no problem. Any other tips, tricks, or questions? One tip I have is before you do something 100 times in a row, send us an email to see if we can do it on the back end for you so that you don't have to do it 100 times in a row. Because there are some like little adjustments that maybe there's not a tool to really do in a nice way that we can just do in one fell swoop in the back end because we have access to like the raw database. So don't be afraid to shoot us an email. The worst we can say is no, and you have to do the 100 things in a row that you were already going to do. So, Chilla?
I was going to say something that we are really pushing for here in South Carolina is trying to post accessible spreadsheets for collectors to fill their data in spreadsheet form and then have the curators print out the labels so that the curators can focus more on doing data cleaning than basically rewriting and reprocessing what a collector is already working on. So it's basically we'll follow the Symbiota upload, all of the fields in the spreadsheet. And we chose to do a spreadsheet instead because that's more accessible to collectors and they can drag and drop when they're in the same county or it's the same day. And most collectors these days use spreadsheets anyway to process their data. It's just that we're asking them to divide it up ahead of time preemptively. And that really, really frees up because it really bothers me that students nowadays, literally a collector is typing up this data, they print it out on a piece of paper, they glue it on a sheet, and then a student goes through and then retypes what's already been typed. It's just reduces errors because the collectors can go ahead and look at it themselves. And also because it's in spreadsheet form, the curator can go ahead and take a look before it gets added as well and uses these things preemptively as well. And they can go ahead and contact the collector and say, hey, something looks funky. So that's just something we're trying.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you haven't done it already, I would definitely recommend to any of your prolific collectors, send them a spreadsheet template and have like one spreadsheet uploading template. Or if they're like, no, I always want to include this or I never include this, then you can just delete those columns or add those columns and create a mapping for that specific collector. So you can do multiple data import, saved data imports. Yeah, Mark says, we use that spreadsheet form here for the herbarium. It works well once collectors get used to it. Yeah. Alina asks, is this the database being used as the taxonomic backbone for Symbiota? No, that's just the taxonomic name resolution service. You put in a bunch of strings and it looks for them in a bunch of different taxonomic resources to see whether they exist. The exact resource used by your particular portal depends on that portal. For example, in the MICO portal, they go with Index Fungorum, and they have some input from Catalog of Life. In most portals, they use Catalog of Life, but then some have had some old data brought in from Tropicos. And then like for the InvertiBase, they use the World Index, World Register of Marine Species, I think is what it's called. So it really depends. And I think that taxonomic name resolution service is just a nice tool to have to make sure that your names aren't misspelled before they go in. But you can always fix them in the taxonomic cleaning tool after they go in too. So Anna says, we do something similar. We have an Excel spreadsheet with guidelines for every field and an example submission. It also lets us send it back for reformatting by the collector if the data doesn't follow the guidelines. Yes, absolutely. It does help to have like either a separate sheet or a separate line in your spreadsheet that you could just delete later that has like full explanation with examples. That's really helpful for people to know exactly what's going into that data sheet. And then Al put in the chat for California, you can error test lat long chords by county using the mapdevelopers.com what county am I in? That's really cool. Oh, and I was also going to make a plug for the GBIF has this tool called the reverse geocoding tool. And it's what they use to make sure that your coordinates are in the same country. And it's not necessarily like you can throw a bunch of data in and get a bunch of data out. You actually have to access it through an API, which means that you could run like a Python or an R script to do the checking. So if you're comfortable in any of those, or you know any folks who are, then they can write something for you. But if you have participated in one of our portal advancement campaigns, we have a script that takes some of your specimen records and passes them to the reverse geocoding API to look for anything that may have like swapped latitudes and longitudes. So if you need any help with that R script, we have some stuff that we could help you with if you want. Anything else? Well, thanks for being here, everyone. Thanks for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful summer. Again, we will not see you in July. There's no Symbiota support group in July, but we will still be here. We'll still be out at those conferences that Lindsay pointed out earlier. You can come find us in person. If you need to meet with us for any reason, feel free to reach out. We can set something up. We're still going to be around. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.